I'm going to take you back about 4 years ago. Emily Shire, what I consider to be a well-known journalist, really making it, called me for a quote for a piece that she was working on for the Jewish Forward. And she said, I'm writing about hookup culture, something that Mark from Shidduch Crisis spoke about earlier. And she said, I need an Orthodox camp perspective for this hooking up in camp sort of culture piece that I'm working on. And I said, that's interesting, because as someone who's conducted research on Jewish summer camps, I know that there are many camp directors from non-Orthodox camps who have to wait until 3 months after the gates of camp close to breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't have that. And I said, I don't know that I have like a juicy quote for you. I don't know that I have this story that you're hoping to get. It's an Orthodox camp. Our lines are farther away. So I went ahead and I said, I don't have this great sort of story for you, but what I can tell you is about the fact that we condemn having what we call Shabbos walks in camps. And anyone who's been to a Jewish summer camp, an overnight camp, knows that Shabbos walks they're part of the culture, that it's throughout the week, who's going out with who, what are you gonna wear? How did he ask you? Of course, all of those gender norms kicking in. And Campstone doesn't have those. And I remember when, as a staff member, people were being educated as to why Campstone doesn't have Shabbos walks. And it was not because we were too frum, and it was not because we thought, all of those sorts of reasons. It was because a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old should not have to withstand the social pressures of dating. And to give you a good example of that, I clearly remember when I had a 9-year-old camper who was not able to go on a trip because she was sick. She'd thrown up. Now, that's unfortunate because the summer is only so long. She was stuck in her bunk, and she said, well, at least I'm not going to gain weight from that junk food that I ate earlier since I threw up. A 9-year-old. So the question is, obviously, we felt quite strongly that a 9-year-old should not have to succumb to the pressures of dating. We didn't think that it should happen for a 10-year-old, for an 11-year-old, for a 12-year-old, for a 13-year-old, for a 14-year-old. But should a 20-year-old have to deal with that sort of pressure? What about she's 25, 30, 40? Is that ever fair or right? What I'd like to talk about today is the language of Shidduch Crisis, and the question I think is, why am I qualified to be speaking about this? I could give you 2 reasons. One, I've been single. I was single for 5 years post-college, which felt like a long time. I've faced some of those pressures, and I'll share a few of those anecdotes. In addition to that, I have friends who are single, who share their thoughts with me, who ask me to alert synagogues and institutions about how they could be doing a better job in terms of inclusivity. But this is what I did. I have a PhD, right? I'm a doctor, and I decided, let's use research for today's presentation. And this isn't something I do so often, but I crowdsourced on Facebook, and just to give you an idea as to how much feedback I got, I'm a person who's pretty active on Facebook. It's part of what I do for a living. I believe it's a great way to educate people, to advocate, to change the world. I actually went on a sabbatical for a good 15 hours, which is a long time for me, because I was flooded with responses. And what I posted was, Shidduch Crisis, please share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Please tell me what you think others should know. And I was overwhelmed. I created a Google Doc and just kept pasting into it. I posted the query in 3 places: on my personal Facebook wall, which is not so personal. There are a few thousands people, everything's public. I posted it in JOFA's Facebook group, which is in partnership with Kolech and Chochmat Nashim, and we have about 1,000 people in there. And I posted it in a Frum Facebook group with, most people are more yeshivish, right-wing sort of leanings, with over 7,000 people in that Facebook group. flooded to the extent that not only was I copy and pasting, but eventually I thought, I can't keep doing this. I created a Google form where people could submit directly to that, so I wouldn't have to copy and paste because it became overwhelming. And I'm still getting messages and phone calls, and it's really, it's been shocking to me how much people have to say and how many people want to be heard. So what I did was I asked this question, and then I went ahead and read through the data that I collected, because that's what it is, and then I identified a number of themes. And I want to share those themes with you, and I want to share some of what I found to be great examples of those themes. Here we go. Language. So I pushed this forward in that I said I find the language of Shidduch Crisis somewhat offensive, find it troubling. I don't know that it's fair to be called a crisis when you're just being a person, living your life, contributing to the world. I think the most interesting thing before I go into the data is that there is no great checklist that I have for how to be sensitive or how to be inclusive or how to fix this problem of I think the stigma that can often go along with being single in the community, because someone who is single is a person and another person who is single is another person, and you can't go ahead and put them in a box. People are people. And I think that's the biggest lesson that needs to come, that I'm hoping will come out of what I have to say. So while I found the language offensive, some people don't, and I think that's okay. But here we go. Language. In terms of the language of Shidduch Crisis, one male said, "Can we stop using the term Shidduch Crisis and replace it with the more general terms demographics and lack of basic respect for others? It's not a crisis that there is a gender imbalance or that most women live through childbirth, and the resulting imbalance of adult men and women is a demographic inevitability. It is a crisis that we can't treat others, married or not, as human beings. It is a crisis that we teach children that they are failures if they don't end up exactly the way that most other people do. And the simple lack of respect for the fact that not everyone ends up in the same place is not a Shidduch crisis, it is a much more general failure. The more that people say it's a crisis and that there are so many more girls than guys, the more entitled the guys feel. They feel that they are entitled to the prettiest, wealthiest, et cetera, girl, because they feel they can be choosy because the ball is in their court, so to speak. The mentality really is awful, and that's something that I think was addressed in an earlier Q&A. A reality is that when there is a greater supply of women as opposed to men, that men believe they're less likely to pair up, and they sort of, and this happens in non-religious cultures as well. I've read up a bit in preparation for what we have today, that they're they're going to be pickier. I disagree with what was said earlier. I don't think the solution is to get fashion advice. I believe that the solution should be to treat people like people. Again, the theme of today. Okay. In terms of someone who appreciated the language of crisis, in that crisis properly communicates to people that you should be thinking about your friends who are single and thinking about people that they may be happy spending the rest of their lives with, or thinking about the fact that they may not be having a place for Shabbat meal or what have you, and that the language of crisis properly conveys that urgency. As someone who suffered immensely from the Shidduch crisis, I personally attest to how difficult and sad and the hardships I went through. It was certainly a crisis, and it's still a crisis. Wonderful, talented Jewish women are going to sleep alone and cry every night while their eggs rot. And they also have the pressure of celibacy, unlike the secular world. If you haven't gone through it, I don't know if you can understand it. It's pretty powerful. The language of singles itself. I find the term singles offensive when I'm referred to as only my romantic relationship status, marrieds, etc. Let's get rid of those terms and labels too. As in the singles, I think I was on a single Shabbaton once, or maybe it was with friends of mine, where there was also a famous singer there, and we were introduced as Welcome Famous Singer and the Singles, like it was the name of his band. Language is important. It's important in every type of communication, and it's important in terms of how we treat people within our community. I think it's important when we talk about singles to also acknowledge we're talking about people who are divorced, we're talking about people who are widowed, and other categories as well. In terms of someone who's divorced, this is some of the good, I think. In my humble opinion, one long-term yet easily remedied issue in the Orthodox world is the absence of shul buddies. Once post-bar mitzvah, your child of the opposite sex often ends up sitting alone in shul, whether it's a Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or any Chag or daily minyan. Create a buddy system. A single mom who has a son, that son should have someone to sit next to during those spiritual moments of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Maybe there's a man who has a girl, a daughter, who could sit with either her or anybody. But having a buddy system, I thought, was a very useful way of making sure that people who are single and children of people who are single have a place and feel and do matter. Another anecdote. This is awful. Being divorced with children who are in yeshiva is a nightmare in New York. There is just no place for a single mother. I was even told by a rabbi that I would not be welcome in his congregation without a husband. My 3 children had been in yeshiva overseas. When we moved back to New York where I was born, I was looking for yeshiva in a good, fairly liberal neighborhood. I spoke to the rabbi of a very well-regarded congregation and was, basically told that my family was not wanted. I was shocked and embarrassed, but very grateful that I was told up front and not after I moved there. In the years that have passed, the idea that a woman with children has no place in the frum community has been reinforced. This is from a woman who was widowed. As a widow for many years, of course, I felt uncomfortable many times at Jewish events, even in my own shul, where people know and mostly like me. Just take the membership dues. It's X dollars for a family. Not everybody is a part of a family. Also, saying a mishaberach for cholim, saying a prayer for those who are ill. In my shul, for example, the men come up to the rabbi with the names. Women are upstairs. When my dad became sick, my husband was no longer alive, I had to speak to the rabbi's son, who was studying to be a rabbi, and a very nice young man, and he came upstairs to gather names from women, but most women don't have the chutzpah to do this. Shul. Before we get to shul, we talk about holidays. When I asked this question, one of the first responses was someone who was single who got married a bit later. Go to Mount Sinai congregation in Washington Heights during Kiddush one time. Ask the first 5 people you see what it was like to go home for Pesach. You will have all the information you need. I can tell you personally, I can't remember at what stage of my being single that this was, but there was one time where I had had enough. I wasn't going to go home for Pesach because the greeting that I had when I got to shul, a shul that I think probably thinks of itself, and maybe is in a number of respects as welcoming, was, "Oh, Sharon, you're the daughter who's single." And I said, actually, yes, I'm single. I also finished one master's. I'm about to complete another. I run a camp that I'm ahead of. They're, fairly accomplished in a number of ways, but yeah, also single. If you wouldn't mind in the future, there are other characteristics about me that you might want to mention when you mention that I'm single. That didn't go over well, but the next summer, instead of having to do that again, I went to Puerto Rico. I worked on a program. My mother felt horrible, and she called me. She said, "Are you okay? This is so awful." And I said, "Mom, I'm drinking a margarita by the pool. I'm okay. I'm good." But that's how I dealt with it for a year. How would I deal with that after 5 years? After 10 years? I don't know. Something family members of single people could keep in mind: yontivs and family simchas can be hard when everyone seems paired off with a spouse and they feel lonely. Also, I've seen amongst friends that often single women are called upon to babysit for nieces and nephews very often, and while I was never in that position, it always rubs me as taking advantage. Shul. This is from one of my best friends. For me, and this was liked by many people on my wall. I know I couldn't get the exact count because the thread was out of control. For me, it's about being included and honestly appreciated. I like to feel that I matter as part of the community. Life in cities is different than in the suburbs, so I'm going to reflect on city living. In a community where you have a diverse makeup of community members, singles, married couples, families with young kids, et cetera, for example, look at shul budgets. How much of that budget is going to family, youth, and teen programming? How much is going to adult education? Are parents expected to volunteer to plan and execute events for kids? Are single people expected to? I know this looks different in every community, looking at membership. Given the budget, why do shuls charge more than half of a couple for a single person? For example, $360 for a couple and $250 for a single person. She calls it the single tax. Look at who is represented on the boards and who shows up for Minyan. I completely understand that adults with kids need to be with their kids during Minyan times, and that's totally fine, but let's have some hakarat tov for the single people and empty nesters, older adults who are ensuring the continuity of the Minyan. I want to be looked at as a valuable member of the community, not as a nebach because I'm single. I want someone to ask me what I'm looking for in my community to keep me engaged and ensure my own continuity within the Jewish community, rather than the entire onus of joining and finding a space to belong to be on me. I'm skipping some of these, but they're pretty powerful. There may be a book here. In many congregations, there's a split, this is from someone who's married, based on marriage status, which is insulting to the married and the non-married. Why separate, label, judge, and choose to socialize with a group or person on the basis of such an external and shallow factor? I used to joke to X, tried to take out any identifiers, upon hearing about a young couple's minyan, I want to be part of the everything minyan. There is so much marginalization, why bring it into our shuls? My friend, here's another one. My friend showed me a flyer for a shul where family pricing, a shul where there was an event with family pricing was listed, but there was no price category for single people, which meant single folks had to pay the same amount as families to attend, and they were not considered at all by the event organizers. Years ago, I suggested, this is a positive, I think, idea of changing the status quo. This is from someone who's single and has written extensively about it. I suggested my modern Orthodox shul in Manhattan, with many single members, include niece and nephew birth announcements and wish the single aunts and uncles a mazel tov. They began doing that. Someone commented about appearance, and not in terms of what we might think, that's already been said, in terms of weight or who's aesthetically appealing, but in terms of religious observance, that they've been pressured to either dress to look more frum or to look less frum in order to get married. She said, shouldn't I be following my religious convictions for me? And I thought that was a valid point. I also think I'd be remiss if I didn't note that I have friends who got nose jobs in order to get married. I have friends who, it's often the mother who's pushed this, who had various weight loss surgeries in order to get married. One thing that said earlier was when you reach a goal, that you want to have this goal of becoming married. Marriage isn't a goal. Marriage should never be a goal. You can't follow a certain path to get married. You could follow a certain path to get a PhD. You could follow a certain path to get a certain job. You can't set marriage as a goal. And to try to do that by having surgeries or manipulating who you are as a person religiously or physically is wrong. And suggesting that to others, I think, is wrong. Education disparity. Shadchan's on Sayu at Sinai set me up with men who aren't educated. Just try it out. You never know. Speak with him. I have 3 Ivy League degrees, for God's sake. At the same time, what we do know is that women are far more educated than men, right? I think right now in America, 5.5-ish million women have a college degree, 4 million for men. The numbers go along with, in terms of grad school. Rachel Patton recently spoke on JOFA's Joy of Text. It's a great podcast about sex and halakha and the interface between the two. And she mentioned that just because someone doesn't have a PhD doesn't mean they're extremely bright. So I think it's important to not totally limit yourself by what degrees they have and how they have them, but can they engage? Can you relate to each other intellectually? And I think relating to each other, we've spoken out physically here, but I think intellectually, religiously, that you can have those conversations is important. So I think on the one hand, you want to be open-minded. On the other hand, I know of a woman who created 2 profiles on a dating website, exact same photos. One, she was a stewardess. The other was her actual job. The stewardess profile had a busy dating life. Her job, and while Mark earlier said, and I feel bad I'm calling them out because they're not here, but said that a woman who's a doctor, not everyone wants to marry a doctor because a doctor has long hours. She had a PhD, she's a professor. Her hours, fortunately, were pretty decent. it's not just about the hours of work, it's that men are sometimes intimidated, and perhaps it's an inferiority complex that I think it's important for people to recognize that no matter the degrees you have, no matter the job you have, if you can engage on a meaningful level and you feel like you interact well, that's what matters. Another thing that came up that I'm short on time, even though I was told I had half an hour, all right, is how involved or assertive should people who are married be? And I think that that's a challenge that many people who are married face. Should I offer to set the person up, or should I own the elephant in the room, or should I only say something if the person who is single brings it up? I think that that's a challenge, and I think that communication, the same way we talked about the communication, the importance of it between a husband and a wife, or between two people dating, the same goes for your friendships and people who are married and not married. Racism, it's a theme that comes up. It is really sad that something extraordinary has to happen for a Jewish religious girl from the former Soviet Union to marry an Orthodox guy in the United States. The American parents view all from people from the former Soviet Union with suspicion and are afraid for their yichus. It comes to the point that when a Russian girl marries an American guy, you have to look for problems in the guy's family. Illnesses, disturbance, lack of being observant, or what have you. In terms of Jews of color, what about the lack of interest in setting up Jews of color? I believe this is one of Orthodoxy's dirty little secrets. Jews of color are not encouraged to date, period. When this happens, it usually is a match based solely on skin color, thus leaving the Jew of color few options, if any, as if there's a stigma Orthodox Jews have regarding African American Jews. Okay, weddings, which is, obviously one of the most challenging places to navigate. I find that sometimes I'm not treated as an adult in the community because I'm single. Anecdote, as a 20-something medical student, I attended a friend's wedding and was seated at the singles/children's table. Me, a young widow, and female cousins under the age of 12. I was once at a wedding where the rabbi's speech under the chuppah was about how wonderful it was that this couple had finally found each other. Which was a little, and it's their late 20s, so. And how everyone at the wedding should go set up people anyone who is single at the wedding. I'm all for community concern in a constructive way, but I don't think the under the chuppah speech is the right place for it. I've also been, so this is from someone who married who responded to that. I've also been to weddings where there's a lot of talk in the speeches about how long it took the couple to find each other. And I also find it disturbing and insulting to the bride and groom and the older guests who aren't married. So there's one person who is a married rabbi who shared this beautiful thought: we need ritual to celebrate other sorts of life events than marital and familial ones. We need to find a way to honor that. I also think it's worth noting, I don't have the exact verbatim quote here, but there were different people with different opinions about inviting people who are single with or without a +1, which I thought was very interesting. Do you have to be engaged to someone to have a +1? If most people are couples at a wedding, can you not bring your daughter or a friend, and if you're gonna give a generous gift anyway, would it really kill a family to pay for an extra seat? On the other hand, it's amazing how much money is blown on weddings. So I think it's a complicated question, but a question we're thinking about. And I had one friend who said that she was once asked by a non-Orthodox person if she wanted a +1, and she said, you know what, I don't, but it just made me feel so good to be asked. So I think that's one more thing I wanted to add. Okay, another theme that emerged from the responses that came in is the question of who is to blame. And some of the responses that I saw for this were pretty awful, but I'm gonna share them. I'm not going to share the most awful ones, actually, because I didn't want to. There's only so much that you could give credence to. I don't think blaming someone for not being married, as I said before, because marriage is not a goal. It can't be a goal. Okay, so I think this is from someone who is married. So I think one of the biggest issues setting singles up is that they aren't open and say no right away. I think Disney gives us a picture of how happily ever after should look like, or love at first sight, which often isn't the case. People should try to go out with people they normally wouldn't be open to, although within reason. And a little condescending. Okay. It's from someone who is single. For the record, while I definitely think the community can do better in terms of treating people as adults based on their age and not their marital status, I also think single people need to take some responsibility for whether or not they live their life like adults. Here's a small example. I remember once getting annoyed that I was invited to a cousin's wedding or something on my parents' invitation, and I didn't get an invitation sent to me where I live, not with my parents. Upon further reflection, I realized that I didn't plan on getting this cousin a gift because my parents would just include me in theirs. And she was sort of owning the fact that you can't have it both ways. Either you're an independent person, you get your own invitation, you get your own gift, or vice versa. But she sort of, my asking this question made her reflect a bit on some of her experiences and take some responsibility for something that she felt like she should be responsible for. This is from someone who is single. The Jewish community does not treat us as adults. Girls still in college 10 years younger than me are considered more mature, better functioning individuals simply because they have a ring on their finger. They are given more responsibilities and more independence. They are capable of contributing to the Jewish community. Singles are expected to contribute nothing. Having a husband shouldn't be treated as a badge of success. It may be a successful relationship, yes or no, but it doesn't make you any more equipped to be a functioning adult. From someone else. If we do decide to turn our houses into homes, we're considered complacent. We've quote unquote given up. By planting roots in our waiting station, we're telling people that we've resigned ourselves to a life of being single, that we're not even going to bother to try anymore. Devorah J., who some of you may know, she wrote a piece a number of years ago, which I thought really was powerful, about her decision to purchase a couch. When she decided, I want a couch. And it doesn't mean I don't want to get married, and it doesn't mean I won't stop dating, but I'm not going to live my life on a shoddy couch from college just because I'm single. Here's another quote from a single man. I've spent basically 6 years living in a suburban Midwestern community, avoiding the local single scene because I'd much rather hang out with my married friends and hear them talk about their kids' poopy diapers, rather than hear my fellow singles gripe about how desperate they are. I feel fairly integrated into the grown-up, quote-unquote, community here. The primary negative experiences I've had been people I barely know trying to pressure me to date the quote-unquote perfect girl for you, i.e., we're both Jewish. Other than that, while I periodically mock poor language choice in shul announcements that ignores non-families, I haven't noticed much infantilizing that others have experienced, unless that's the real reason I get so many Shabbos meal invitations. It's possible. So it's interesting. So as I said, I had my time in the singles community, and there were a number of guys who would call me at some point, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe Friday, and say, Sharon, what are you doing for Friday night? Because they knew every Friday night we were hosting dinner for 15, 20, 25 people, however many people ended up showing up. And it became a joke because we invite 5, we have, and then a max of 25, 30 people in a pretty small apartment, and I would look around my apartment as the invitation list got longer and just throw anything from the cupboard and make a kugel out of it. So all of a sudden, there was potato chip, green bean, whatever, kugel. And so there was one week where one of the guys called me up. He said, Sharon, what are you doing Friday night? I said, I'm eating at your place. I said, and you're hosting. I said, what do you want me to bring? And he said, you're serious, this is happening. I'm like, this is happening. He said, can you make one of those kugels? And I said, are you serious? He said, no. But he did host that one time. He bought pots and pans and learned how to cook, and I thought I think that his now wife appreciates the fact that I made him learn how to cook. Single moms, this is to change the mood back into a pretty tough situation. There are a number of organizations out there now for women who want to become moms who have never been married through in vitro fertilization or what have you. There's one group called Kayama Moms. This is a shout out for you guys. But I think that's important to acknowledge that that's possible and that people are doing it. We should be supportive. It's exciting. One of our board members of JOFA, Carol Newman, her daughter just had a granddaughter and a grandson, and I think that's beautiful, and I'm thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to modern medicine that can happen. This is going to be tough to hear. On Facebook, people always post about infertility and the difficulties, the treatments, etc. Believe me, getting my eggs frozen was the hardest thing I ever did. I was alone, no husband to hold my hand while I injected the medicine, no one to wait in the waiting room after the procedure. No one to share the burden of cost, $15,000 a shot. It's so annoying when people write about it publicly on Facebook. At least they have a husband, can adopt, foster. I am adopted. I can't even consider that at this point. We are single and infertile. As we age, we have the same burdens as married people, yet we continue to handle them alone. Bullying and financing a home or car, all living expenses, we have successful careers or not, with ups and downs, but we don't have someone to share the triumphs or burdens with. Our parents are aging and we are taking care of them. When I think of having a child alone, I literally freeze. I support myself, have a full-time job, support my elderly mother and some other family members, make frequent trips to help my aging mother. I'm terrified of how I would do this as a single mother. As one person, yes, I have many friends and family, but really the person the responsibility falls on is me. So I'm a single father. You should try being a full-time single dad with 4 kids and can't get a nanny, not welcome at any of the parenting coffees, and being the only one in the situation. Job opportunities. The following happened a long time ago when I was already in an older single mid-20s. And I invited my Midrashah students for Shabbat. The immediate reaction of one of them was, "But you don't have a proper house." Another girl immediately turned on her for being thick, and I pointed out that we also have Shabbat where I live. Or being quote unquote, or being let go from a job because I couldn't give that Shabbat experience. I just want to scream out to schools that statistically, it seems that enough of their students will be older and unmarried, and it's actually a good idea to have a role model who is the same and is active in our community and dedicated to Torah. Unfortunately, not enough places are willing to hear it. And then this category I'm calling sexism/ageism/age is a factor. And this one, so just so you know, so I met my husband through Sayu at Sinai. And it's interesting because I went on maybe 5 dates in 5 years through Sayu at Sinai, but one of them happened to be with him. It didn't work the first round. It did a few years later. And I became a shadchan. The week of Shavuot Brachot, I applied to be a shadchan on Sayu at Sinai. And one thing that people spoke about earlier in the Q&A was older men wanting to date women 35 or younger. I had a rule that if a man could have fathered the person of the age bracket of the people he's dating, I wasn't going to do it. And some of them got really mad at me. They said, "I'm going to get you fired." I said, "Good luck, I'm a volunteer." And I think that's important to note. Here we go. A pet peeve of mine is when 50 and 60-year-olds are looking for women much younger than themselves and to have kids with. It's an insult to my 41 years. I think it's important to not lump all singles together. There's a big difference between the 20 to 30 singles and the 30, 40 and upwards. I agree that people in their 20s are also concerned and want marriage, but for those of us over 30 and approaching 40, the reality of being single and alone is much greater. It is so hard to go to a Shidduch meeting and people talk about their 24-year-old who just needs a Shidduch. I'm not saying they don't, but the burden of it is very different based on age. Okay. Transitioning again. Age gap is something that we've spoken about already this evening a number of times, and there's this reality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some information from John Burge, who wrote Datanomics, and there's also an article that he wrote in Time Magazine, How Dating Became a Lopsided Numbers Game. According to the 2012 population estimates from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey, there are 5.5 million college-educated women in the US between the ages of 22 and 29 versus 4.1 million such men. I vaguely referenced that before. That's 4 women for every 3 men. Among college grads ages 30 to 39, there are 7.4 million women versus 6 million men. We know more, we're better educated. It's not that he's just not that into you, it's that there just aren't enough of him. So what's interesting is, in this article, he looks at the Mormon community. And in the Mormon community, according to the American Religious Identification Survey, there are now 150 Mormon women for every 100 Mormon men in the state of Utah. It's worse. It's a 50% oversupply of women.
More men or more men?
More women.
More men?
More Mormon, as a tongue twister, yeah. Perry pickle leather, yeah. So it's interesting, so they have the same sort of problem, and some of the trends that we spoke about before apply to the Mormon community. When you have this huge pool of women for the men, they're less likely to commit, and they're gonna be more picky about who they engage or interact or date. I found this very interesting. So the reason for the Mormon discrepancy and disparity is that Mormon men are being asked to serve missions at precisely the time of their lives, late teens, early 20s, when sociologists say men are most susceptible to jumping out of organized religion. They're leaving the Mormon faith, a lot of them. It's very likely that in 2012, that's why the LDS Church changed the year when Mormon men go on their missions, and lowered it to the age of 18. They were hoping to sort of avoid the dropout rate of Mormon men from the religion. In Orthodox community, do you think that's true? Orthodox men leaving? Although we speak a bit about people leaving the faith, it's not at the same rate at all. Orthodox men leave around the same rate of Orthodox women if they're leaving, but most stay. There is a good amount of research on JOFA's most recent webinar, so another plug for JOFA. Check it out, jofa.org. Some of the trends though, that happen within the Mormon community, Mormon men have become more demanding about women's looks, which in turn has made women obsessed with standing out from competition. One consequence, a culture of plastic surgery has taken root among Mormon women, which I've shared with you. I know a number of women who are Orthodox who also had plastic surgery with parental pressure and funding it. In the modern Orthodox community and in the Yeshivish Orthodox community, there is a trend for men to marry younger women. It's a trend. You don't have the same trend in the Hasidic community. So you couple that reality with the fact, as we spoke about the age gap, how you have, I'll just give you the numbers. Couple the increasing number of children born every year with the traditional age gap of marriage. The typical age for Orthodox Jews is 19 for women and 22 for men, which means that for every 122-year-old man in the Orthodox dating pool, there are more than that, there are 112 19-year-old women, 12% more women than men. What's interesting is, so whose fault is this? How do you deal with that? I used to teach at Central, at Yeshiva University High School for Girls, and there's a tradition that I believe is still standing where the juniors go on a date with the seniors. The junior Central students go on a date with the senior MTA students, which isn't an official thing, but it's this, social norm that is inculcated at a relatively young age. Generally, in the modern Orthodox community, we're not looking for juniors in high school to be dating for marriage necessarily. Something to think about. I also think a factor that I thought of because of the other speakers was that Balei Tshuva, more women are Balei Tshuva than men. So we have more women entering the fold as becoming observant. And in addition to that, 70% of converts, according to the Basin of America, are women. So you have the age gap, you have the birth rate, you have the sociological norm, then you have the tshuva, who's a new pool of people coming in, and then you also have women converts. So the conflation of all the above makes it challenging. According to a 2013 article in the Jewish Weekly Ami magazine, which we love, there are now 3,000 unmarried Orthodox women between the ages of 25 and 40 just in New York City, and another 500 over 40. That may not sound like a huge number, but if you take into account that New York's Yeshivish Orthodox community, just the Yeshivish Orthodox community, is a total population of 97,000. It's huge. It's big. In the Hasidic world, this is not a problem. There is no Shidduch Crisis because Hasidic men, an 18-year-old marries an 18-year-old. A 19-year-old marries a 19-year-old. You don't have the numbers problem. I wanted to share a brief piece from Yita Halberstam, who's written about a number of things, including the Shidduch Crisis. This is the harsh truth, she wrote. The mothers of good boys are bombarded with shidduch questions on a daily basis, a veritable barrage of resumes either flooding their fax machines or pouring out of their email boxes, while those with similarly top daughters sit with pinched faces, anxiously waiting for the phone to ring. The disparity is bare, bold-faced, and veritably heartbreaking. She said, I feel a little sad each time the fax machine cranks out yet another resume for my son. I know full well that there are fantastic girls out there who are his equals, perhaps even his superiors, who are not receiving comparable treatment. I ache for their mothers who repeatedly call the shadchanim, who never call back, but are visibly more responsive if you are the mother of a boy. Inwardly, I rail against the unfairness of it all. Yes, she wrote, spiritual beauty makes a woman's eyes glow and casts a luminous sheen over her face. There is no beauty like a pure soul. Makeup, however, goes a long way in both correcting facial flaws and accentuating one's assets. And if my cursory inspection was indeed accurate, and I apologize if the girls used such natural makeup that I simply couldn't tell, barely any of these girls seem to have made a huge effort to deck themselves out, i.e., it's their fault. Of the 648, I should introduce what the 648 is. Basically, someone posted this online, and there were many responses. Of the 648 mostly shocked and outraged comments posted to the Jewish Press website, one stood out. Dear Mrs. Halberstam, I am also a Jewish mother, it began, but I no longer share your joyful anticipation of walking my child down to the chuppah. She died last year of anorexia. I've shared a lot. I've shared a lot with you of, I think, some ways of improving the community, some ways of being more sensitive. Treating people like people, again, is the number one message I hope that people take away. I also hope that people take away marriage is not a goal. You're not better because you're married. You're not lesser because you're not married. It's not about blaming women for not putting on enough makeup or losing enough weight or dressing with high enough fashion. This, I'm not positive, but there was a huge outpouring on social media after I posted my inquiry. I'm not sure if this was in response to that or happened just, the timing just happened to happen this way. But someone has started a campaign. I pledge to ask my son what he talked about on his first date before asking, was she pretty? Because I'm #not that mom, #not my son. I pledge not to ask how much she weighs because I'm #not that mom, #not my son. I pledge to consider girls by their merits first instead of rejecting them outright for their age, weight, or yichus, because I am #not that mom, and the boy who looks at stats instead of people is #not my son. I know I've shared a lot, and I hope that there's a lot about. I think what was different about my presentation is that while I do have certain anecdotes, and I could sort of free-form share some of those, what JOFA is all about is empowering people and sharing their voices, and that's what I did today. Instead of going ahead and sharing random date stories, and I have plenty, I tried to share the voices of the many. And there are many more voices that needed to be heard. And I encourage you to follow us on JOFA, read the JOFA Journal, read our blogs, follow us on Facebook, come to the conference, speak up. We want to hear you.
You said that marriage is not the goal, so how would you describe it then in your own words?
It's wrong to say that marriage is a goal. I think it's unfair. It's not, when you can't control something, it's like telling someone who's infertile, your goal is to have 5 kids. And that's even with modern medicine or what have you. It's not fair, it's not right. I do think that, there's this famous story of, the person who's going through a flood and the rescue workers come and everybody comes and they say, no, Hashem will help me, Hashem will help me, Hashem will help me. In the end, he ends up going upstairs, the grade upstairs, and he says, God, you were supposed to save me, and he said, I sent the rescuers, I sent everybody. There's a similar story of a lottery ticket, where I dive into win the lottery, but you never bought the ticket. So I think that you still have some responsibility to leave things open. I was on Saw You at Sinai. It wasn't my thing. I went on 5 dates in 5 years from Saw You at Sinai. That's not very many. It happened to be that one of them is Ben. But I just decided for myself, I'm going to open up doors, but I'm going to live my life. And it was actually interesting. We had a in Philadelphia when your wife was there. And there were certain things that I decided, what's interesting is the list of all these dating profiles. Are you modern Orthodox? Are you modern Orthodox? Or are you, I think there are about 30 categories, maybe more. Are you going to cover hair? Are you not? I think one category to be added should be, will you sign a halachic prenup or not? I think that would be more important than body type, for example. But I believe in opening doors. I believed in being social. I believed also, though, in pursuing my career, in doing chesed, and going to shul, and living my life. And and one thing, I don't know sure if I said or not, I in the end, I did all those things and I got lucky. Because, from what people have shared in every single conversation here is there's there's a gap. I'm lucky. But sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. So I think that you do what you can, the same way you apply to a bunch of colleges, even if you want to go to one. You open up as many doors as you can in life for whatever you want to do in life. But I think it's wrong to say that this is why you're not married. Someone said, I used to bring up a Amalek on dates. I said, how do you deal with Amalek? How do you deal with God, commanding genocide? And one person said, that's why it took you so long to get married. And they said it in jest, but I think it was pretty impressive that I was having, a rigorous conversation on dates. So I don't know if I think that answers your question in more than I intended to, so.
I am sure I am not capable of expressing enough thanks to our speakers and to everyone here for your passion for this subject, evidenced in the time that we have spent and the really wonderful conversations that we have had. I think we've expressed together a great deal of passion and caring for the well-being of the Jewish people, for the well-being of people who have not yet perhaps found their soulmate. And so I'll close with a prayer that we should, through this experience, help to become productive advocates, helpers, compassionate people towards everyone in every situation, treating everyone, to use the words of the Akedah Ba'asheru Sham, to accept people where they are and try to be as helpful and productive as possible with them.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.